Welcome to the Hero's Journey Project. My name is Nick, and this is a podcast about comic books. I got into comic books when I was about 10 years old. I'd be buying them off the spinner racks at the corner store. Eventually, I moved down to going to the actual comic book shop. It's great. I mostly favored humor books, talking about like the cracked magazines, Mad, all those kind of things, and even like all the comics that were parodies, the Plastic Mans and those are awesome. To be fair, my collection was a lot of a lot of late 80s and early 90s type of stuff. So terribly mass produced, all the gimmicks, covers, and things that they were pulling off back then. Yeah, I was in for it. And then I quit comics for a while. I got into speculating for a bit, and it was great. Buying and selling. I love the hunt. I love digging in dollar bin boxes and stuff. I ended up eventually selling my collection. Wasn't worth all that much, just mostly because it was that late 80s, early 90s stuff that was so heavily produced, and it wasn't anything rare or really exciting. But I always enjoyed it. I had a soft spot in my heart. And after a while, I still kept up with comic books and read a lot of blogs and posts and podcasts, kept up with podcasts and stuff. So I thought it would be interesting when Action Comics 1000 came out. I thought, wow, it would be interesting to see what the progression was of Superman from, Action Comics #1, going back to all the way up to 1000, just to see how that character changed, the stories, all the storylines that he's gone through in that time. What happens is, so I went back to Action Comics #1. I started reading the first few issues, and I realized really quickly that, I guess I should read about all the other characters as well that were from around that time. So a lot of the early DC characters, some Marvel, the timely at the time. So it ended up that I created a spreadsheet, and I'm reading all the stories about all these characters, and their appearances each month, and trying to really read about all their appearances. So it started off with Superman, but I'm reading about 50 different 60 characters or whatever. I didn't realize there's so many things, so many issues going on back then in the late 30s, early 40s, 1930s, 1940s. Back then, all the comic books were, for the most part, anthologies. There was like maybe, 4, 5, 6, up to 10 stories in each issue. Now, to be fair, I'm not reading each issue front to back. I'm just reading about the stories that pertain to me. Like in Action Comics, for instance, I'm only reading about Superman and Zatara at the time. So there's a lot of other stories in there that I'm not reading about. So like I said, they're all 68 pages. Right now, my project's progressed until I'm into the 1942, 1943 era. And I'm at the point where the comics are dropping down to about 60 pages, instead of 68. And really all the major publishers are doing that. So you've got DC, Timely, Quality, and Fawcett are the ones that I'm reading right now, and they're all around this time dropping. It seems, from what I understand, it seems like the cost of publishing was going up, but they didn't want to increase the price because they're all 10-cent comics. At 68 pages or 10 cents, dropping down to 60 pages is still 10 cents, but it was just the cost of publishing was increasing, so they just put less pages in each book. A lot of the time, what you can see is a lot of references to World War II, Nazis, Japanese, Axis powers. These are recurring villains and bad guys in all these comic books. There's a lot of portrayals where the Axis power seems so very evil, and they're villains and grotesque. It's very much propaganda to try to get Americans into thinking that the Axis powers are the enemy. And this takes place right now. I'm at a point where it's not too long after Pearl Harbor happened, so it's definitely a sore spot there. All right, so let me get into so this podcast, really what I want to do is talk about some interesting things that I've come across during this era and kind of get into that mindset and just share my findings, because I think there's a lot of really interesting little nuggets. Like, for instance, one of the issues of the Human Torch. So now this is the original Human Torch, who was actually Android originally, and he can flame on at will. They kind of, as the stories progress, they sort of drop the Android portion of it, and he seems more humanized for sure. But in 1940, the Human Torch, in one of his stories, gets asked by the mayor to head up the Suicide Squad, or a Suicide Squad that may be formed or something. And all of a sudden, some catastrophe happens, and Human Torch gets called away, and it's never mentioned again. That's it. So, the first appearance of Brave and the Bold, first appearance of Suicide Squad was in Brave and the Bold 25, 19 years later in 1959. But here we have a reference to a Suicide Squad in a timely comic, early Marvel, 19 years earlier. I'm going to share with you an interesting panel from the Human Torch in 1942. So this is the original Human Torch. Let's see if you can pick out what might be familiar about this particular panel. So this particular panel, I mean, you got the Human Torch slapping his sidekick Toro, right? I mean, so it looks a lot like perhaps the Batman slapping Robin panel from World's Finest 1953, or sorry, World's Finest issue number 153 from 1965. It looks like maybe Timely / Marvel was ahead of the time, was ahead of their time when it came to slapping sidekicks. So that was I thought that was really interesting, that some really interesting parallels, and it looks like those panels are like really side by side. They look so similar, an homage or a swipe. I don't know. So after that, other interesting things you should maybe to know about is a lot of Golden Age heroes. They added sidekicks as the issues progressed, and a good number maybe were for comedy relief. Give the heroes somebody to easily have some dialogue with, banter back and forth, and team easy teams to make. So like obviously you had the Human Torch and Toro. You had Batman and Robin, Captain America and Bucky. Captain America and Bucky, Star Spangled Kid and Stripesy. You had Green Lantern and Doiby Dickles, Wildcat and Stretch Skinner, Plastic Man and Woozy Winks. These are all characters I'm reading about now. There may be a few that I missed, but sidekicks seem to definitely be the thing of the day for sure. So then something interesting that I'm reading about right now was just Sensation Comics number 13. Let me show you the cover to that one. So Sensation Comics number 13, that shows Wonder Woman on it. She was the main feature of Sensation Comics. You've got Etta Candy and a couple of the Holiday Girls on there. Etta Candy's seems to be Wonder Woman's one of her best friends, where she can call on Etta Candy on her mental radio anytime she's in trouble. This is a pretty classic cover where you have Wonder Woman throwing a bowling ball down the lane, and you got the three major heads of the Axis powers there. So you've got Adolf Hitler of Germany, Benito Mussolini of Italy, and the Emperor Hirohito of Japan. So those three guys are featured very prominently in a lot of comic books of the day as the master villains, or the head bad guys, if you will. So that's probably going to do it for the first episode of this podcast. I really just wanted to sort of introduce you to the project, kind of get a feel for the things I'm looking at. Hopefully in the next episodes I can show you some other interesting nuggets, and you can follow along as I go along my hero's journey. All right, well, thank you very much for tuning in. Please like and subscribe. Be great, of course, and we'll see you in the next episode. Thanks.